Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest speaker today is Cindy Luppi, and we are very fortunate in Winthrop to have Cindy with us today. But as important, she's also a resident of Winthrop.
Go Winthrop! Yay Vikings!
Today, Cindy's going to speak about PFAS, and PFAS is a harmful, deadly chemical that we have learned about over the last probably 20 years, how harmful it is, but it's still around and it's still hurting us and our children. Cindy is part of Clean Water Action. Cindy is a graduate of McGill University. She has a degree in interrelations. And what's funny, which I learned today, I didn't know, is that she was a member of the Peace Corps and she did her duty in Africa. When she came back to the United States, she began to get involved in different organizations that deal with the environment. One thing she is now, which is so important, is that she's the New England director of I can't read my own writing, of Clean Water Action. And we are so fortunate. I met Cindy when she was doing little pieces around our state and our country. Now Cindy still does New England, which has expanded, but now she's also involved in the parts of our whole country. So I'm very proud of her, and I'm proud that I know her and have worked with her, and that, may I say, she's a lovely woman. And we're very grateful to have her give us a wonderful informational talk today. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. I'm a proud member of Winthrop Mothers Out
Mothers
Front.
Out Front, yes.
So this is very exciting to be here with you all. I love Winthrop, and this is going to be a great conversation, and I really encourage people to ask questions as we go along. In parts, it might sound a little bit like alphabet soup, because that's what chemistry is like sometimes, but really what we're talking about is PFAS chemicals that are a problem mostly because they're toxic, they're persistent, and they're also very mobile. They don't necessarily stay put in the products that they originally are ingredients for. So those are some of the characteristics that make them a big problem, and particularly building up in our water system. Although I do want to flag that we in Winthrop are on the MWRA system. I think most of us here know that. And our drinking water has not detected any serious levels so far of PFAS chemicals. So we'll start out with some good news. So, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, that's the technical term for PFAS, and it's really a class of thousands of chemicals that are used for a variety of stain-resistant and non-stick and waterproof functions and products. Who here is familiar with Teflon pans? Yeah, do you remember when Teflon pans came out? It seemed like it was a big revolution that you could get to non-stick pans, and you know, as the sometimes you can see these ads from back in the day that show these, like, you know, happy grinning pans. You know, it's an amazing concept. We're non-stick, but unfortunately, they also have a range of health impacts, and they're very hard to clean up. So in the 1940s, DuPont was the company that sort of launched the PFAS experience and work towards dissemination. So DuPont was the company that really launched the Teflon process, and then a little while later, 3M, which is a company in Minnesota, introduced another chemical that was very similar, called PFAS. It's one of the PFOS combinations of the alphabet soup in this class of chemicals. And that chemical was used to coat carpets and textiles and was marketed, I bet you'll recognize the name Scotchgard. PFOA and PFAS are two of the chemicals in that class of PFAS. And you can see from this picture, from Scotchgard, from Teflon, these chemicals have just spread out into so many different consumer products. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is PFAS as an ingredient in firefighting foam, because our firefighters do a lot of training with this foam, and it can be kind of like swimming through the foam, so they can really get exposed. But what is exciting about this moment in time is that there's a lot of innovation going on that is looking for safer alternatives to PFAS in many of these products. And Rhode Island and Connecticut have banned the sale of firefighting foam containing PFAS. So that's a signal that we in Massachusetts can take action, and also that there are safer alternatives and safer configurations of firefighting foam that don't put firefighters and our water resources at such risk. So you can see by the visual that there's lots of different uses and lots of places that PFAS can hide in products that we don't think of, like Gore-Tex. Gore-Tex is a waterproof coating and a kind of fabric that is really good for outdoor gear. And thankfully, a number of companies are moving away from Gore-Tex and have made commitments to shift to safer alternatives, including Patagonia, and just this January, REI. So we're starting to see important movement in reducing our exposure to these chemicals, which is exciting. Yes?
All lipsticks or
Just some lipsticks. And one of the things that we're working on, because that's such a good question, because often, we'll look at those teeny tiny print on ingredients lists and look for chemicals that we may know. Sometimes PFAS can even be a contaminant and not listed as an ingredient. So that's actually one of the things that we're working on, is to get complete transparency of products that contain PFAS, so that we all can know and look for safer products. But this is just sort of a smattering of some of the products that we can find PFAS as an ingredient in. That includes also building products, some photovoltaic panels, some roofing and paints, and some air conditioning components. So this is a big area of chemical sales for DuPont and 3M and for the companies that have been creating this chemical. Fortunately, as I said, there's particularly been movement in safer firefighting foam combinations of chemicals that are less dangerous and provide less of a threat to human health. So we're particularly excited about that, because we want firefighters to face less threats on the job. And they really, we think that they deserve that. So we're actually working closely with the firefighters on this effort, and it feels really good to be promoting safety for the people who stand up for us here in Winthrop and in communities across the country in emergency settings. So we are learning more and more about these chemicals as time goes on. Early on, sort of post-World War II and till just a few years ago, there were just two, the PFOA and PFAS configurations that we heard about. But starting in 2006, new versions were created and developed by chemists, and now there's over 9,000 in commerce. So this has been an area of science that has just, just exploded. No pun intended. I don't know, has anyone here seen The Devil We Know, which is a documentary about some of the first experiences that the public had really getting to know the health impacts of PFAS. It was set on a farm in West Parkersburg, Virginia, which was very near to a DuPont factory. And there was deep concerns about local impacts from the operation of the factory. And ultimately what was discovered, and this I think is really such a clever title for this documentary, an internal memo was discovered from back in the 70s that an internal staff person had said, we are concerned about the following health impacts, but we're also concerned that other alternatives might have the same impacts. So let's stick with The Devil We Know. So I think what's powerful about that is it gets to how science gets obscured when there are for-profit companies that are benefiting, and at the same time, communities like ours, like West Parkersburg, that can be the collateral damage. So there's been, there's been ongoing information coming out about these chemicals since the 70s, raising concerns, raising questions about health impacts, and we're starting to get more and more information. We also know that there is a complex class of chemicals in this family of chemicals, and not every one of these 9,000 chemicals has been fully studied and researched and characterized, but the newer PFAS chemicals that have been studied have shown to be as toxic as the chemicals they were designed to replace. So what is happening now is that scientists, independent scientists, are calling for PFAS as a class to be phased out and replaced with safer alternatives. And that is why so many states are starting to take action, which is, again, part of the good news portion of this story. But the bottom line with PFAS, the thing that makes it so impactful is that PFAS build up in humans, in animals, and in plants. They bioaccumulate. And we have evidence that through national tests done with the CDC sampling, 97 to 99% of Americans have PFAS in our blood. 100% of breastfeeding mothers have multiple PFAS chemicals in milk, as shown in a groundbreaking study that took place in Seattle. PFAS are found in umbilical cords and newborn babies in studies in the EU, in China, and the US. And that is why we're particularly concerned, because this is pollution that ends up inside us. As we said at the beginning of this chat, PFAS can be very mobile. They're persistent and they don't stay put in products. So that means we can get exposed, and then because they're persistent, they hang around inside us as well. And PFAS can be toxic at very low levels and have links, as you can see, to a whole set of health harms where We're particularly concerned during the time of COVID that PFAS have been shown to suppress the effectiveness of vaccines, for example. We're concerned about, obviously, risks with cancer. And I'm just going to pause here for a second and ask you all, do you have people in your family or in your neighborhood or your friend circles that are struggling with cancer right now? It seems like it's at epidemic proportions, and we know that some of that epidemic can be controlled. So speaking as someone whose mom battled cancer for nearly a decade, I think that every time we can prevent cancer and prevent some of these other chronic diseases, it's really worth the effort. So you can see that there are liver impacts, there are links to risk of high cholesterol, reproductive impacts are of deep concern with evidence showing there can be lowered birth rates, decreased fertility, and increased incidence of birth defects. So all of this, is a very heavy burden. Question from the audience. How is it that if PFAS is no longer being produced in the US, there are still impacts, it's still a problem? And I would say two things. One is that there was a voluntary agreement for companies not to make those first two PFAS chemicals anymore, PFOA and PFAS. So those two have been phased out by chemical companies, and that's a good thing. But they shifted to thousands of other versions, and those are still being made. Also, these chemicals are persistent, and it's challenging to work on cleanup. There's a lot of emerging science really working to develop more effective cleanup, because these are such persistent chemicals. It's a challenge. So there's those two chemicals that were the first wave of the PFAS impact. Those are no longer manufactured here, but others are. So it's a great question. And as we talked about, PFAS do not stay put in the products in which they're ingredients. They can travel on air and in water and have been found all over the world. And you can see from this cycle that they start out in consumer groups, in consumer goods, and then go through their life cycle, where they end up in our neck of the woods, going to facilities like the Saugus incinerator, and then can be very persistent in the ash from the incinerator after the waste is burned, and can also escape from the stacks of the incinerator during combustion. So there are impacts the whole life cycle. And our goal is to work on reducing known areas where PFAS has had an impact by reducing the use of the chemicals in products, and shifting away from PFAS and working with safer alternatives. And that is ultimately the big solution that we're all working towards here. What many people feel is that if you think of an analogy in your head, think of a bathtub, and the bathtub is full and starting to overflow. What is the first thing you would do if that were your bathtub in your home? Pull the plug, turn off the tap, right? Stop the water coming into the tub. That is what we're interested in, working to stop more PFAS adding to this high level of contamination. The blue dots are places where testing has been done for drinking water and PFAS has been detected. So the blue dots on this map show test results where PFAS has been detected at higher levels. The purple dots show military sites where PFAS has also been detected, and that is most of these communities had their drinking water contaminated because firefighting foam sunk into the ground and contaminated groundwater. Hudson, which is in the middle of the state, is an outlier. They had contamination from a Teflon medical device coating facility. But for most of these communities, it had to do with exposure from firefighting foam. There's also been drinking water contamination, as we noted, around the purple dots, around the military sites, and those are in Westfield, Hyannis, Barnstable, Ayr, and Hudson as well. So this is what we know so far from early testing. And as we've been talking about, if you look at this hierarchy of best practices for controlling the spread of toxic chemicals, the big top asks are that we work on elimination and substituting them with safer alternatives. We can also look at engineering controls like scrubbers on stacks. But in general, what the chart is really saying is it's better to prevent pollution than to clean it up after the fact. And that is why we are really interested in looking at the places where we can replace PFAS with safer alternatives in products in our everyday lives. So these are just a few examples and a few steps that we can all take at the individual levels. We can avoid those bags of microwave popcorn and get popcorn that you use in your microwave in a paper bag or a popcorn maker. Unfortunately, a lot of microwave popcorn on the inside of the bags, those bags that pop up, contain PFAS. Takeout wrappers and food packaging can often contain PFAS as a coating because it can help to be a grease resistor for the paper. Again, there's a lot of good news in this space. We can look to companies like McDonald's and Panera and Taco Bell, over 19 fast food companies and restaurants over the past few years have committed to phase out PFAS in food packaging. So there is good news here. You don't have to worry about all of your takeout food being coated with PFAS, but just in case, don't use the wrapper from your takeout food as like a placemat or a plate. And don't store your food in takeout containers to be on the safe side. PFAS can be even in those salad containers at places like Whole Foods that are sort of recycled brown looking. When there's a coating on the inside, it can contain PFAS. Whole Foods is another one of those companies that has committed to phase out PFAS, but you can't know just by looking at the container whether it contains PFAS. So we're really grateful for counting on these retailers to be moving forward these strategies that phase out PFAS. Another place we've talked about PFAS being present in our homes is in carpets and rugs. And the good news here is that most of the largest manufacturers have stopped using PFAS, And retailers like Home Depot and like Lowe's no longer sell PFAS-treated rugs. But PFAS are still widely used in indoor and outdoor furniture, textiles, and in clothing. So that is why we're working with states across the country to pass laws that make sure that give all of us the confidence to know that PFAS is no longer in the products we're bringing into our homes. And you can get lots of great information on how to find PFAS-free products at this great website, pfascentral.org and madesafe.org. Sierra Club and PFAS-free outdoor gear is also a good search term to really get specific information about what you're bringing into your home. Personal care products are another source for PFAS exposure. You want to look for words that, anything that says something might be long-lasting or waterproof, especially mascara, foundation, and lipstick. It would be good to look up the ingredients in those personal products. And one of the best websites for getting all that kind of information is Skin Deep. So highly recommend people checking out Skin Deep. And how many people here floss their teeth? I do. I am religious about it. Often the floss that is glides very easily, it's been tested and it can contain PFAS. So be careful because some dental floss brands can have PFAS, and you could be applying it right to your gums. So again, pfascentral.org is a great website where you can get more details. Even period products. I don't know about you, but I've been seeing lots of ads for underwear that can be used, menstrual underwear, because it can be sort of wick up moisture. And according to a recent study by Made Safe, 11 out of 17 products tested positive for fluorine, which is one of the markers for PFAS. So want to be super careful when we're buying period underwear as well. Cookware. This all started with the Teflon. So how do we both hang on to nonstick cookware and not expose ourselves to PFAS? First off, much nonstick cookware has PFAS in it. So those are products, nonstick, that would be best to avoid. A preferred product would be a pan that's uncoated, made with stainless steel, cast iron, glass. Those are the best options. And be a little concerned about coatings with silicone and enamel, and definitely avoid PFAS-coated brands like Teflon, Autograph, and more. And you can visit ecocenter.org for the full list. Also, we've been working a lot with Consumer Reports on this campaign. And a few months ago, they came out with a great article with specific brand names and specific types of pans that they tested and they looked at for cost and availability and performance and function, and also no exposure to PFAS. So that's another great informational resource. But you can also just go to ecocenter.org. It's a great organization based in Michigan. We work with them really closely, and they have an independent testing lab that is part of their organization. So they have done a lot of this work. Here in Massachusetts, we've actually taken a number of steps. We were one of the first states to establish lower levels of contamination for these chemicals in our water. And that's very exciting because particularly for communities that are having their water tested and PFAS is detected in the water, you want to make sure that there are action steps that need to go forward. And that's what happens in a community if the PFAS levels are above the state maximum contaminant levels. So that's a good thing. There has been funding that the legislature has set aside for water testing and also for treatment and remediation. That's a really good thing. We're particularly concerned about farms. Farms can get exposed to PFAS through compost. If the compost is contaminated, then they have spread contaminated PFAS compost in their farm, and that can mean a really significant cleanup that often, farmers can't afford. So it's a great thing that Massachusetts is moving ahead with setting aside some funds for cleanup. We've also taken legal action against some PFAS manufacturers, and that is particularly thanks to our now Governor, Maura Healey. When she was Attorney General, she signed Massachusetts onto some multi-state suits. So that is all good signals. But the most exciting thing is that last legislative session, a number of legislators joined what was called the PFAS Interagency Task Force, which was a number of government officials and legislators who studied PFAS and developed a plan of action. And that plan of action has now been introduced this session that just started in January and is, we hope, primed for early action in our legislature. So the heads of this commission are the heads of the Public Health Committee in the legislature, which is very exciting. Rep. Hogan and Senator Sear from down on the Cape. Senator Sear is particularly involved because of the contamination on Cape Cod and the deep concern in his district. This action plan is pretty comprehensive. It's pretty exciting. It would ban PFAS in food packaging, so we wouldn't have to worry about that, in children's products, in fabric treatments like Scotchgard, in personal care products, in cookware, and in firefighters' personal protective equipment, their turnout gear. And again, that is something that the fighting community is particularly pressing for. Some of the turnout gear currently contains PFAS, and unfortunately, cancer levels in firefighters in Massachusetts are about twice as high as among the general population. So anything that we can do to reduce exposure to these chemicals for firefighters is very important and can hopefully help bring those cancer numbers down. It also makes sure that all this work is done within the decade. Every day we delay, someone's health is potentially affected. So, I wish that I could say that we will do this absolutely by tomorrow. But it does take some time to shift out PFAS in the different products that are available in our communities. So it's going to take a few years. But this overall action plan is pretty comprehensive. And it's also exciting for communities that have known contamination already because it sets up a process to restrict PFAS discharges in groundwater and surface water. It gives us all what's called the right to know. It requires manufacturers to disclose if they add PFAS to products and gives us that transparency. And again, it establishes an ongoing fund for testing and for cleanup. So I'm excited to report that both Rep. Jeff Turco and Senator Lydia Edwards have co-sponsored these bills. So we are very well represented here in Winthrop. In talking to Rep. Turco, he was particularly struck by how expensive it is to clean up PFAS once it gets into a community's water supply. And I think obviously as a dad, he's concerned about health impacts. And as a legislator, he's concerned about the state budget and making sure that, you know, we don't have this endless sinkhole for cleaning up on the back end. You know, please, when you next see Senator Edwards and Rep. Turco, please thank them. And if you'd like more information about PFAS or have any, you know, additional questions, cleanwater.org is our website, and we have a lot of information broadly about how to prevent harm to our health from toxic chemicals like PFAS. So lots of online resources to help. But mostly I just want to thank everyone for your interest in this and for being part of the solution, because I think part of why our legislators know we care about these issues is because groups like Mothers Out Front are very vocal and speak up to protect health and to protect future for this generation and next generation. So thank you all.